Robert, hello.
Hello.
Thank you. This is odd, isn't it? Because you've written a book that essentially sort of tear your ribcage asunder and display all of your innermost secrets. So
yes.
You could answer every question I ask by saying, well, just read the book.
Yeah, because I'm a pervert. I've written the whole thing down. So, there's nothing in between the lines. It's all in the lines.
But it is all there, isn't it? All of you, or most of you.
Yeah, it's fairly... I thought I had a good story to tell, a sort of mixture of the unusual and very typical. So all the stuff, all the teenage angst about, why won't these girls fancy me? Why do they lack the basic imagination to want to get off with me? That's fairly, normal. There again, what I do for a living is a bit unusual. It's not normal to sit here in this lightless booth being interviewed by a person.
Although it's what you always wanted. Not specifically this episode of that, but
how do you know? This is it. Hang on. Listen, stop. That's it. I've just peaked.
But you did. Your dreams are coming true, aren't they?
Yes, the professional ones, definitely. No, I decided what I wanted to do when I was about 13, which is freakishly early, I think. And because I'd always... I was very quiet as a child and quite shy. In fact, people kept telling me I was shy, and so I thought, well, I must be because people keep saying I am. But I was always I could do impressions of teachers. I was making up funny songs. I knew how to sort of amuse my friends, and I avoided getting bullied by, I'd always identified the biggest lad who wasn't himself a bully and make him laugh. And he was, then he became my sort of patron. And then when I was 13, I realized I could do that on a stage in front of people I hadn't met. So that was the sort of breakthrough, really. And then, and then I sort of worked out this weird plan about how I was going to...
Michael Heseltine's political plan.
It's not an attractive trait, is it? The whole thing on the back of a postcard, but it wasn't a postcard, but I did have a diary. And there is an entry on my 18th birthday where I say... okay, right, so Cambridge Footlights, meet someone funny to work with, Edinburgh Fringe, Radio 4, BBC 2, Channel 4, Hollywood. Now, Hollywood, that entry ends with, I'm going to be bigger than John Cleese. I think Mr. Cleese is safe from my bigness.
Heseltine never made Downing Street either, so the parallels resonate. It is an autobiography that you've written, and you started it presumably shortly after turning 40. Or thereabouts.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
It's not quite Kenneth Branagh or David Beckham territory when they were writing autobiographies before they were barely out of their teens. But there's a very real sense that you have not completed a journey, but you've got a lot behind you.
Got a lot done.
Yeah.
Well,
emotionally and...
What it isn't is it's not a straightforward celeb autobiography, how I got to be so super duper, because I'm not really famous enough to write a book that dull. So it sort of had to do something. On the other hand, neither is it this cutting edge, social science book about gender and masculinity with a 30-page bibliography. It's not that either, but it's a sort of memoir heavily based on my teenage and childhood years, sort of with its thinking hat on, with a preoccupation with masculinity and how boys are supposed to be boys, and because I've just always been interested in that, partly because I found it quite a tight fit when I was a kid. I never had a problem with my sex assignment. I didn't want to be a girl, but I did find all the rules about what you're supposed to do as a boy. You're meant to love football, and there's no better part of the week than games or PE and swimming and climbing trees, and you're boisterous and you're cajoling and you're cheeky, and I couldn't do any of that. I was almost completely mute. There was always a time at the end of, friends' birthday parties where the mum will be clearing away what's left of the angel delight, and she'd say plaintively, I wish they were all like you, Robert. And I'd be almost indignant if I didn't get this compliment. But I was also uneasy because I knew that I was supposed to be noisy.
And your dad was the polar opposite of all of that. I mean, the book in many ways is as much about him as it is about you.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, I say later on in the book, if you want a man of a certain age to go a bit quiet and stare into the middle distance for 5 seconds, ask him about his relationship with his father, and then expect the word complicated to feature quite heavily in the next sentence. It was complicated because he didn't really know what to do with small children. He drank a fair bit. He was on quite a short fuse. He punished his sons physically. There again, to contextualize that, we're talking about the 70s when, there was still corporal punishment in primary schools. You could work as a teacher and still come at a 9-year-old with a stick, and that was fine. But anyway, my mum had enough of it by the time I was 5, and that's when she divorced him.
The way you write about your mother securing your stepfather is it's a thing of beauty, isn't it? As if she really basically had a lasso.
Yeah, no, she was she wasn't wearing her glasses because she was on the pool. Yeah, she
At the golf club where your grandparents
That's
worked.
right, yeah. My grandparents worked in the kitchen of the golf club and my mum worked in the bar there sometimes, but there was some sort of ball or Christmas do, and that's where she I say in the book that my stepdad was called Derek, that she it wasn't so much a courtship as an Anschluss. She marched peacefully into his heart and planted a flag.
And she got mostly what she wanted.
Kind of, yeah.
In terms of security for you and your brothers.
She explicitly said she was looking for a little bit of security for herself and her 3 boys. She didn't really have that many other options, really.
I mean, people will be surprised to learn that you're not remotely posh.
No, I mean, they would be forgiven for. I mean, it's my own bloody fault. I mean, I've been doing a reasonably good impression of a middle class person since I was, 15, 16. Yeah. So listeners might be a bit surprised to hear. I grew up in this bungalow and we read the Daily Mirror and we watched Blind Date and we drove secondhand cars and we went on package holidays to the second tackiest bit of Spain and everyone had a job, no one had a career, no one had been to university, the odd raised voice about whether we could turn on the heating, that kind of thing. It was a fairly standard Northern English working class that's revealing class, not class.
Yes.
I even changed my accent. I don't know why. It's a character flaw. There's something weird going on.
Well, you consciously changed your accent when you were 15.
Yeah.
Why is that a character flaw?
Between 15 and 18, I don't know. It makes me feel like a sellout in some ways. It makes me feel like I'm not ashamed of where I come from, but I really genuinely didn't like the sound of my own voice. And it was partly to do with who I was watching on TV. This will sound very silly, but when Rick Mail in The Young Ones says, "Vivian, you bastard," that's a very different sound to "Vivian, you bastard."
Yeah, it's completely
because to me,
different.
bastard, it just sounds so much more aggressive, and it reminds me of Dad, of whom I was terrified.
What accent do your brothers have?
They've kept their native Lincolnshire,
which is quite a broad accent.
I suppose I can't even fucking do it. And, I always slip into Yorkshire, which is nothing like. I suppose you're talking like this. You're saying, "All right, James, you all right, mate? What are you doing? What are you up to, me duck?" So
it was a big effort then. I mean, I'm always intrigued by posh people doing the same thing. People who I always say David Mellor. I probably shouldn't mention names. Who go the other way, because he was at a provincial grammar school. So he at some point clearly decided to start talking like the Duke of Windsor because that would be for him advancement. That's definitely not why you tried to talk a little bit posh.
No, it was I don't know what it was really. It was partly it was about that time, 15 or 16, that I realised that I remember having a conversation with in the book I call her Tiffany, my friend Tiffany Rampling, and she was just a female friend who became a very good friend after it was made clear that she was never going to go out with me. I was talking to her about, it was the very beginning of sixth form, and I was talking to her about, what I wanted to do. I thought I might want to be, do I want to be an actor or a writer? I don't know what you do. Do you go to drama school? There's no internet, obviously, so how do you apply to drama school? It's not immediately clear. And she said, yeah, but after university though, Rob, I mean, after you've been to university, obviously. And I thought, and that was literally the first time someone had said to me, obviously you're going to university, you're the sort of person who goes to, it just hadn't been obvious at all. It was, it was
not even teachers.
It was a grammar school.
Right.
I have tortuously conflicted feelings about that issue, if we want to bore everyone about it, because I'm very grateful to that school. But on the other hand, anyway, let's not go there. Let's
go there a bit. On the other hand, it's a system that entrenches intellectual privilege. But if you hadn't gone to a school like that, it's unlikely you could have gone to Cambridge. So you have in the back of your mind the you that didn't go to Queen Elizabeth Grammar School.
My brothers, for example.
Yeah.
Who both went to the secondary modern. They left at 16. They got jobs. But if you put all three of us in a line, aged 11, there is no massive difference in intellectual ability or academic attitude. It was just this, this random version of an IQ test that had been discredited for 20 years, even then in 1980, whenever it was I took it, 83. And there are consequences, and as I say, I will always be grateful to that school. But my feeling is at the moment that it is mainly, that system is mainly designed for middle class fathers like me, rather than working class boys like what I was.
And
I did. the defenders of that system, they always talk about the anecdotes rather than the data, and I am the anecdote.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. You know, there were all of the other
You're the cognitive dissonance because it did for you.
Yeah.
So that's the anecdote versus the data.
So hence the torturous confliction.
You've gone
because you don't want to say you're pulling up the rope bridge after you've climbed up, but on the other hand, it just doesn't do what it's supposed to do for most people.
How did your brothers react when you got in?
My oldest brother, Mark, was proud and pleased. The younger of my two older brothers, Andrew, who's only a year and a bit younger than Mark, they're 5 to 6 years older than me, took it as a personal affront. Because he was always the slightly more rebellious one, let's say. And there was, I mentioned in the book at one point, I just got into the grammar school and I was buttering a slice of bread with butter straight from the fridge, and I made a massive pig's ear of it and ripped the butter to shreds. And Andrew said, "Oh, grammar school education, and you can't even butter a slice of bread." And I thought, "Oh, fucking hell, this is going to run and run, isn't it?" And it did,
Yeah, of course.
Clever boys don't have common sense.
Are you close?
Ish, yeah. We text more than we talk. I see Mark a bit more often because Mark's more willing to come down to London. But since our mum and stepdad and dad and all of our grandparents are gone now, so it's really only them and my sister Annabeth, who lives in Preston. So there's less of and I've got 2 kids, and it's just a bit more of a schlep now to go to get there. I mean, it is fairly isolated, from where I grew up. It takes an hour to get to the nearest dual carriageway, which is the A1, otherwise known as the Lincolnshire bypass.
It's a weird road.
It is a weird.
Loads of pawn shops on it now.
It's a mixed bag. Yeah.
I asked because I wondered how they felt about it. Did you show it to them before you published it?
Yes, I did. Every significant living person in the book. So my wife Abby, obviously, and my 2 brothers, my sister, and a couple of close friends, Will, who turns up in it. They all saw an early draft, and they all came back with a double thumbs up broadly. Mark thought I was a bit hard on Dad. I think probably because he was that little bit old, well, quite a lot older. So the scary aspect of Dad was easier for him to predict. I mean, that was the thing. It wasn't being slapped. It was not knowing the rules. So I was only 5, and for me, it just it would come out of nowhere, and I wouldn't understand.
So he'd processed it, and you
whereas Mark could see it coming, could get it right. He knew how to get it right. He knew when he'd overstepped the mark. Whereas I sort of just didn't. So I found Dad, it's true in my memory that I found Dad a much more terrifying figure than Mark or Andrew did.
Where did the book come from? Was it bubbling away for ages? Because you mentioned gender and masculinity and autobiography. I thought it perhaps was a book about death in some ways.
It is pretty deathy.
Yeah, but also about how it changes you and how it makes you look at yourself differently.
Yeah.
So did you have a desire to write it before you had that catalogue of loss?
I really ought to have an answer worked out to this by now, but it is slightly mysterious to me whether the stuff about my feelings about masculinity, whether that came before the desire to write a memoir. But I think they, the challenge of the book was to put, it's sort of 2 books in one, was to put those 2 elements at the service of each other.
Which you do brilliantly. There's no seams in it. You never sort of think, now we get a flashback and now we get some pontification.
I mean, cheers. I mean, I got halfway through the first draft and I thought, actually, this is all working quite well. And, this is very funny. This is a good idea for a book, and all I have to do now is not screw it up. And it just became very clear that the events in my life that really stuck out, I really could see them all through the prism, if you like, of gender and the mistakes I was making and the things that happened to me and how they relate to expectations on boys and men. And when it comes to bereavement, that sort of made sense too, because I think boys more than girls are told not to express negative emotions. Man up, be a man, act like a man, all that stuff. It feels like you're being told, there is a benign meaning for that. You could just be saying, do the thing that needs doing, even though you don't want to do it. Man up, do your homework. Bit aggressive, but there's that. But I think the more sinister meaning is, that negative emotion that you're feeling, grief or pain or anxiety or embarrassment or shame or fear. That is not an acceptable emotion for a boy, because it won't be an acceptable emotion for a man. So don't express it. And the more you hear don't express it, it starts to sound uncannily like don't feel it, don't feel those feelings. And it sort of has to come out somewhere. And I think quite often it comes out as anger. And I still do it. I speak for myself. I've been trying to ring some bells. But I still get angry when what I'm actually feeling is fear, or I get angry when I'm feeling shame, or I get angry when I'm in grief. And it just doesn't work, and it doesn't prepare you for adversity. So when Mum died, when I was 17, I was lucky enough to have these friends and family saying, and if you need to talk, just talk, I'm here. I mean, if you want to talk, just talk. And if you don't want to talk, maybe that's something we can talk about, but do talk, I'm here. And I thought, well, I was grateful, but on the other hand, I was thinking, all right, this is novel. Now you want me to talk. Okay, what's this talking business? How does talking change anything? What? And so I think it leaves you unprepared for tough times. I think it also leaves you unprepared for love, which is, which I sort of get to in the last chapter of the book. And, the way I freaked out when I became a father for the first time. And I think that has a lot to do with my upbringing. And that level of emotional repression.
Because you felt, well, I was going to say let down, but repressed is fairer. You were in an environment of repression, and you were frightened that when your first daughter was born, that history might repeat itself?
Yeah, frightened of the responsibility. And what do I remember about houses with small children in? And, there are
violence mostly.
Well, fear and violence, yeah, certainly. And I would rather chew my own arms off than hurt the girls, but there were other aspects of Dad's behaviour that did sort of creep in there. There are lots of ways of being a dad, but instead of making up my own way, the original model reasserted itself. I started drinking a lot more than I had done. I started saying yes to literally every job coming, which I absolutely didn't need to. I was very fortunate with my career at that point. Peep show was going, the sketch show was going. I could have done those two shows, and that's better than, that was everything I ever wanted. Instead, I said I had this breadwinning panic.
Right.
A man works, a man leaves the house, a man leaves the woman to do everything, and he earns the money, he provides. And that was the whole Breaking Bad kind of thing going on in my head. And, that explains the existence of movie mistakes, or at least that's my excuse. And Robert's Webb, the TV show about the internet, which would have been a bad idea even if I'd had my own way and called it Worldwide Robert.
Success is the Worldwide Robert. That's all. Never know. Success is the weirdest thing like that, though, because you never would have got any of that off the ground if you hadn't already done Peep Show and the sketch show. And yet, you're right. It's learning to say no to stuff career-wise that's more important than getting the offers in the first place.
Saying no is my favourite hobby now.
Is it? So you've come over that route. You're also married to a woman from the brief bits that we learn about her who would, just laugh in the face of the dichotomy you just described, wouldn't she? The idea that you should be going out and breadwinning and...
Oh, she would also notice that it's very convenient, isn't it? Because, much as I love my children, very small children, babies and small infants, looking after them is thankless, relentless, and quite boring. And so, it's quite convenient that we have this role where we get the hell out of that place and leave someone else to do
while patting ourselves on the back for being breadwinners.
Yeah,
so you're having your cake and eating
for
it.
doing the prestigious, well-paid job.
Yes.
That everybody, and it's their job to be nice to you if you're, if you're in this ridiculous... show business is a precarious and
of course
weird profession. If either of my girls said they wanted to be actors or singers, my heart would sink because it doesn't go right for most people. But if you do get lucky, then it's a great job. So there was that.
Do you think you might be slight? There's two ways I can ask this question. I could either say, is it unseemly to be so interested in yourself? But that will sound very unfair.
No, that's fair enough.
Or I could just say, do you think you're too hard on yourself?
Well, I hope that the governing tone of the book, particularly when I'm talking about my teenage self, is self-critical or self-mocking rather than self-flagellating. I mean, there's nothing more boring than a writer who clearly, won't stop protesting how much he hates himself. But I think I have a sort of amused impatience with my teenage self, and I quote bits of the diary, and I get to almost criticize the diary in real time. Does that happen in books in real time? But yes, live criticism, comment on the diary.
Red button.
But it's interesting what you said about being interested in yourself. I'm not really writing the book because I think I'm special. I'm writing it because I think I'm typical.
Yes.
And it's an act of communication. I hope that it's a very generous and outward-facing book. And particularly when it comes to bereavement, I'm not saying, oh, poor old me. It really is there to reach out to other people who've lost people, which of course is all of us.
Well, yes, eventually it's all of us. But it, as an adult, and I suppose losing a grandparent, one takes in one's stride as a younger child a little bit.
Yeah, but it's
But when you lose a parent. I mean, you lost a mum at 17. That is not an experience that most people, thankfully, will go through. And I think you probably could have written the book if your mum was still alive, but not if your dad was.
That's fair enough. Yeah, I think my mum would have reservations as well. I mean, it wasn't like I was drumming my fingers waiting for my father to pass on. I thought you said you had emphysema. Come on, I've got a deadline here. No, I couldn't have done it while he was around. Not just because of sheer cowardice, but also it just would have been cruel. It would have been mean. I mean, in the later chapters of the book, I hope I redeem him to some extent, and there was a lot to like about him, a lot to admire about him. And as we both got older and mellower in a way, it became, we never quite saw eye to eye, but it was something close to a friendship. I certainly liked him. It's a mortal lot that you love your parents, whether they're great people or not. But to like them is a separate thing. And I think most people do like their parents, but that wasn't guaranteed with me and Paul. But I did like him, and he was very popular. He was kind in many ways, and I wrote and delivered his eulogy when he died in 2013, and I say in the book I remembered some of his unremembered acts of kindness. And he was wildly charismatic as well. You would. You'd watch him walk into a pub and the whole room would subtly adjust itself in his direction and settle itself in for a treat.
Are you like that?
No.
Not even a little bit?
Not really.
Because people who only know you from the telly might presume that you are.
No, I give myself permission not to be funny about 23 and a half hours a day.
He was proper proud of you, though, which you seem a little bit surprised by. Particularly with that scene, you begin the book practically with a comic relief scene, don't you? When you did the flash dance,
when I did
which was campness personified, and Dad is in the book very much whatever the antithesis of campness is. So it was nice. It's quite touching when he tells you how proud he is.
It was. I was worried. It wasn't until I saw myself on a monitor they were repeating. You do it live. I realised just how naked I looked. I was in this leotard with these American tan tights that went up virtually up to my hips. Yes. Thank you, James. It was good actually. I got wolf whistled by a white van driver the day after. He went, "Oi mate, nice legs." I went, "Sorry, no, seriously, nice legs." Thank you. Fantastic. But anyway, I was worried what he would think, and then he left me this voicemail saying, "I saw you being interviewed, being worried about what I'd think of you looking like that.
That's right.
Cobbler's boy. I thought you looked fantastic. I couldn't stop laughing. Proud of you, mate."
How would his life have been better if he'd learnt some of the lessons that you've learnt? If he'd been able to talk about his family? Are you sure that it would have been? Because the thing about the stiff upper lip, which is a synonym for all the stuff you've described in a way, isn't it? The idea that you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Some people would be terrified of not having a stiff upper lip, which is kind of your point. But reading about your dad, I kind of wonder who he would have been if he'd been emotionally literate.
We'll never know, really, will we? I mean, partly it's a generational thing.
Yes.
I mean, look, I'm not saying that. Wouldn't it be wonderful if men were bursting into tears every 5 minutes? That would obviously be horrible. And there's something to be said for stoicism and grace under pressure, and all that stuff that you find in Kipling's If. I just challenge the idea that this is an exclusively male trait, because I've seen women do it all my life. And as far as physical courage goes, you don't watch someone give birth twice and then you very quickly, let go of the idea that physical bravery is a male thing either, or exclusively so. But maybe it's something of his generation comes into it, of course, because those guys, the baby boomers, are almost all the sons and daughters of soldiers.
God, yes.
And those people who fought in the war, they came home, they'd seen and done some extraordinary and, one would imagine, very traumatizing things, and they didn't get any support at all.
They screwed down the lid.
They absolutely had to. And I think, I would say, this will sound a bit glib, having, of course, never been in their services, but, that empathy and emotional literacy is the last thing a soldier needs. You can't be thinking about, what it's going to do to the family of this person that you're required to shoot. So, it's a heck of a thing to have to do. And of course, they need a certain amount of, keeping it together. But then when they come home, they need a lot of support. And that generation, of course, didn't get it because because it was a different time and we knew less about this stuff. But I think there's a possibility that they pass that on to their children, where in peacetime, it is less useful. So, of course, there are times when you've got to keep it together. And, if somebody, if your best friend says, I've got cancer, you don't get to cry on them. They get to cry on you. You have to be the wall that wave breaks on. So, there is a time to be strong for other people, of course. But then you should be able to talk to someone else about it. And, it's the idea that it shouldn't be, shrugging it off, ignoring it, pretending it's not happening, turning it off like a light switch, as they say in the Book of Mormon. It should be the exception rather than the default.
Do you think that's why certain men do burst into tears and tell you how much they love you when they're pissed, but never any other time? Because somehow I
saw an advert for Sky Premiership, and it was the tagline was something like, "Feel it," or it was something like "Feel everything." And it's funny that football is one of those times when it's okay for men to get together and sing with joy and weep in each other's arms, and that is that's the sort of outlet. And fair enough. I'm not down on football just because I was no good at it.
But you're getting better now. It's how the book ends, with you playing in the garden with your daughter.
Who are 6 and 8, and they're just about to overtake me.
The kind of career is, I'm glad you've used the word lucky, because a lot of people don't, and even if it's not true, even if your talent is such that you would have shone in any firmament, just to acknowledge that there's a degree of luck in this kind of thing keeps you rooted, doesn't it? It keeps you
Absolutely.
sane. What would have happened if you'd never met David Mitchell?
If I'd never met David Mitchell, I suppose I would have tried to do sketches with the other people that I met there. There were a lot of funny people there, but the thing about David is, when I first saw him, I was a year ahead, and I went to see him. I was second year, he was the first year, and he was doing a show with his mates, and the lights came up, and I'd seen funny student performers before, but there was something about David. There was this combination of ease and focus, which he looked like he lived there, which conceitedly I thought reminded me of me. And I was in quite a competitive mood at the time, and I thought, what are we going to do about this problem? Am I going to destroy him? Because I was on the Footlights committee, I was in a position.
Power.
I had a little tiny bit of crazy, pretending to be grown-ups student power. But no, I asked him to do a show. I sort of say in the book, I had a conversation in my head like a bit in The Empire Strikes Back. Sorry to bore anyone who doesn't like Star Wars, but there's, the Emperor goes, "There is a disturbance in the funny. We have a new enemy, David Mitchell. He's just a boy. He could destroy us. If he could be turned, he could be a powerful ally." So I did turn him and made him a powerful ally, yes.
How?
I asked if he'd like to do a two-man show the following year when we were in Edinburgh in 1993, and he said yes. I mean, he was being asked out on a big comedy gig by next year's Footlights vice president, so he wasn't allowed to say no.
Non-negotiable. Yeah. Are you still the senior partner?
No.
When did that stop?
That evaporated months later.
Only months?
When he realised I couldn't type.
So is that how it works when you were writing stuff? You'd be marching up and
he
down.
typed, I paced. Yeah.
And while you did.
Well, I didn't do much pacing in his bedroom where we did most of our work, because he had a computer next to his single bed in the tiny flat where we lived, and where he lived,
yes.
but where I stayed because I was going out with someone, a flatmate. Which wasn't a good idea, because he was the first vertical person I said goodnight to and said good morning to, and we really got on each other's nerves. That was my fault.
But the friendship, it wobbled a bit, did it?
There was a time sort of when it all really kicked off for us, sort of 2006, 2007. The sketch show started, Peep show was established. We did a national tour. We did the Apple ads. We did various that we did a book together. We did loads of stuff. We did magicians, and it was all packed into a sort of 24 months. And we would see each other literally every day. And for two people who are not in love,
yes,
that is a lot of time to spend with each other. So we never had the row.
Did you have the kind of...
We never will have the row.
Right.
Yes, tetchy silences. We could do passive-aggressive silences with that lethal English courtesy. It was a sight to behold.
What reeled it back in? What rescued it? Space.
Mutual necessity. To get... Separately, we're both bone idle.
Right.
So it was great that we found each other, really, because we were sort of each other's boss, and we had to arrange, when am I going to turn up at this place to write some sketches. When we were writing sketches, we would go to the pub together. We would have in the evening, we'd start talking and wait for a funny idea to creep in from the edges of sight. We'd have a couple of notebooks out. We'd just talk, really, and I kind of miss those conversations. We would just talk about what was annoying us, about politics or about television or about the weird things that our friends did, and see if there was an idea there. And we would, end the evening merrily with 5 or 6 ideas and then write them up sober in the morning.
And that's chemistry.
Not in the morning, in the afternoon.
Sure, that's chemistry.
That's finding the same things funny.
Yes.
That's what really made the difference. And then there's a sort of stage thing going. There's a performance thing going on, that we have this sort of complicity that I sort of know what he's doing without looking at him, and vice versa. And the joint Mitchell and Webb ego was always bigger than its competing parts, and that's why, as long as we thought we were doing better stuff than the Boosh, or if we were keeping Little Britain honest, we were happy.
I love that idea, because there's room for all of them, but you want to be...
Yeah, no, we were, I don't feel like that at all anymore, but
you need egos.
When you're starting out, you need a bit of self-confidence and a bit of...
validation.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And we sort of validated each other, so that was crucial, really.
What I would find hard to do is pinpoint in the, because it's up until success, really, the book, isn't it? It's up until marriage and fame.
I hate memoirs that don't include any famous people, but I've more or less written that. There are 2 showbiz anecdotes, and they're good ones, but mainly it's childhood and teenage stuff, and then a bit of and then it finishes at the end of Cambridge, and then there's a massive fast forward to me as an adult. Father.
Yeah, which is, it's an interesting gap, but where on that graph, if you were plotting it, where do you like yourself?
I think it's a very difficult thing to say out loud. I think I do like myself. I think
But you haven't always, have you?
Well, yeah. I think there have been times when I've been aware that I haven't been behaving well. Definitely. Certainly as a student, there was, after waiting a colossally long time to lose my virginity, which in the end I had to do it for the sake of my eyesight. That's a Billy Connolly joke. But by the time I got to university, there was a certain amount of promiscuity going on, and I made promises that I didn't keep. And so that, I was aware that I was behaving badly there. I was also aware that, because I was I was slightly starry and grand in Footlights, and by my 3rd year, I was under the impression that I was behaving like an actor as if I was in The Apprentice, and I hadn't noticed that acting was a team sport because I didn't like teams or sport.
Okay.
So I had this up yours attitude that I was the best, everyone had to keep up, and I was good, but I didn't mind telling everyone that I was good, which is deeply obnoxious. And
it's worse, isn't it, when you are good? If you're rubbish and you tell everyone you're great, that's forgivable because you're ridiculous.
It's worse when people have to agree. But
that's conceit.
It was, and insecurity as well, and just this feeling that I used that my what I fondly thought of as my talent. I'm not sure if I really believe in that word actually, but that capacity to do the thing. To practice the thing that doesn't feel like work so often that you get good at it, because you have this kind of I can't think of the word, but you're sort of made for it in the first place. So practicing doesn't feel like practicing. I had that, and I wore it as a suit of armor, and I was very upset if people didn't notice how very shiny my armor was. But, I sort of grew out of that and realized that, it is a collaboration, and you do your best work when you collaborate with people instead of trying to compete with them. And only arseholes would rather compete given the choice.
Indefinitely. And some people never do. You see that in their 50s, 60s and 70s. It's not something that you leave behind as childish things, is it? You see people who are obsessed with getting one over still now.
And it's crazy because I think of when I think of the word masculinity,
yes.
And what it means. I can't I avoid the phrase toxic masculinity in the book because it's a bit of a fuck off to blokes, and I wanted men to read the book as much as women, and they are doing.
Yes.
But also because it kind of implies there's a good version of masculinity, and I'm not down on men. I think men, just like women, are flawed humans who are capable of being magnificent as well as behaving disgracefully. But masculinity, what is it? It just conjures these stereotypes from the last century about leather driving gloves and body odor and medallions. And when I think of the men in my personal life, my friends that I admire and what I like about them, we're talking about the gentle dads and the reliable partners and the blokes that you catch in random acts of kindness. And these to me are the grown-ups, the people who've grown out of gender. And who aren't having to perform maleness. It's the opposite of what you see on The Apprentice.
Yes.
What you get on The Apprentice is this, the need to dominate other people, the Weasley interest in hierarchy, the stupid idea that inflexibility is a virtue, all that stuff.
You call it moronic in the book, don't you?
I do, yeah. And it's no coincidence that, that show has given us both Katie Hopkins and Donald Trump.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. You mentioned insecurity and approval. What's odd? I think all people, and your book means we review all of our relationships, especially, I think, men reading it. We're almost identical ages. I lost my dad at a similar time.
I'm sorry.
But I followed my dad into the same profession, so I got his approval. Mm-hmm. I got his validation. I wish he'd hung around for a little bit longer to see us doing this. It would have been a real highlight for him. Whereas you were never going to get that kind of validation from home, were you? You were never. What? I suppose I'm asking what you were measuring yourself against.
I remember Dad saying, all I really want, boy, is to put you in a box saying, doing all right. And I think that's the ambition of all parents, and it's a perfectly noble one. And so he didn't really get it about. It was hard because before you have any measure of success as a comedy actor and writer, it's a slightly complicated thing to explain to people.
What is it you do?
What the hell it is you're doing. So they get used to the idea of Edinburgh. Oh, you're doing Edinburgh, right? August, Robert goes to Edinburgh and tries to be famous. The rest of the year, what is it you're working on at the moment, boy? Well, we've got this first look deal with the BBC, so we have to write. Sorry, what it is you write 5 scripts and they're not going to make any of them, but they say they might, and I get paid. Okay, yeah. So it's good now. I get paid. Oh, well done, boy. You get paid. Good. How do you afford the rent then? Well, and so
the stuff you make that doesn't get shown. The pilots that you have
pilots.
They all made this thing that you can't watch it.
Yeah, they had to get very used to the concept of pilots, not just pilots that don't get written, but treatments for pilots. Yeah. And trying to describe this to your grandparents and your great auntie Trudy as well as Dad. So the colossal relief, apart from anything else, of Peep Show coming along. So then I could just say, I'm making another series of Peep Show, and they'd say, good. And but sorry, your question was what was I measuring myself against? I've no idea. I think David and I had a view of what we'd like to do. We knew that we wanted to do a sketch show, ideally on BBC Two. And what came along first was a sitcom on Channel 4. Yeah. And we really weren't grumbling.
It's late 20s.
And then eventually we got both. My very late 20s, yeah.
So had you sort of, I know you were doing all right, and at risk of sounding like your Auntie Trudy and insisting on more detail, were you beginning to panic at all? About the fame side of it, rather than the security.
It's not quite panic, but there was a subtle resignation setting in that we were subsisting as comedy writers from about 97 onwards. So that's 2 years after I left university. We started to earn a living as writing for the links on the Jack Doherty show on Channel 5, writing sketches for Armstrong and Miller. There was an Access show called Comedy Nation where you literally brought along your own superhero costume if you wanted to be a superhero. And so we were doing that, and we were working as writers, but we were not working as actors, and actors, performing this stuff is where we wanted to go. So we thought, okay, right, well, it might turn out that we are okay paid comedy writers for the rest of our lives, and well, that will be something. I mean, that will be something because we like jokes, but it would be a great shame if we don't get to perform it very often in front of many people. So we were hugely relieved. I mean, Peep Show was the break, and it came along in 2000. I mean, there was a big gap between filming it and it going out, but we made the first half of the pilot. Channel 4 bravely commissioned the first 12 and a half minutes of the pilot in 2001, and then eventually we did the second half 6 months later. I had to get a haircut, and then they commissioned a series, and then that went out in 2003.
Did you and David talk about that side of it? That kind of, it'll be all right if this is all we carry on doing.
Yeah, we were really sort of there to cheer each other up about it, and there was always an illusion, probably not quite an illusion actually, but there was always a feeling of progress. We could always say, okay, this time last year we had a slightly worse slot in Edinburgh. And this time last year we were doing this, and what we did last week is certainly better than that, don't you think? Yes, I do. And so we were always trying to keep each other's morale up. So again, I don't know how it's so much harder to do it on your own.
But the best thing about it is that you were in exactly the same boat. So that gene that kicked in, the competitive gene that kicked in when you saw him on stage, if you'd had side projects, I mean, you weren't completely in each other's pocket, but... And I want you to answer this honestly. How would you have felt if he'd got an offer that didn't involve you?
Oh, dreadful.
That was huge.
Oh, appalling.
Would he have done it?
Good one.
Would you, if it was the other way around?
What if it was like a big acting job?
It was a bit like when Rick Astley was discovered by Pete Waterman, and he was told you'll have to lose the band.
Well, it sort of did happen in that I was taken on by an agent and she didn't take David.
Right.
And then later on, she saw me and him do a show together because she'd seen us in a play where I had the lead. But David was playing a couple of other characters. And then a few months later, she saw us in doing our own two-man show, and she realised, obviously, let's have David as well. She worked for another agent who didn't like either of us, but anyway. But there was that separation, and there was a pilot of a sketch show called Bruiser, which I got, which they didn't want David, but David was brought in as a writer, and eventually he inveigled his way into it.
Like Leroy in Fame.
Exactly. Just David Mitchell, just like Leroy in Fame. That's
peas in a pod. But I mention it, and it's interesting that because these were month-long windows and failed projects that he did end up getting involved with. I'm intrigued by that little period at the end of your 20s where if you didn't have each other, even though things were going well, because you were in exactly the same boat, you could just keep each other going. Quite a lot of double acts, and I don't know that you think of yourself as a double act necessarily. Quite a lot of double acts seem to thrive on the sort of latent tensions and rivalries and jealousies. You two now and
now it's very different because we hardly, I did back with him this summer, and that was the first time we worked together since the final series of Peep Show, which was,
of course, and yet in the public consciousness, you're still
a good couple of years ago. So we've had a chance to miss each other, and also we've become kind of closer in a way because we were each other's best man at each other's wedding, and he and Victoria came to my dad's funeral, and stuff like that, and the fact that you really have to go out of your way to see people now, because we all used to live. There was a whole bunch of friends living in Swiss Cottage and then Kilburn, and they've all sort of split off into different directions as they start their own families. And so you have to, make an effort to see your friends now in a way that they used to be just you'd walk into the local pub and you'd see someone. And of course, it's not like that now. So, having to make an effort sort of, it makes it more, feel more valuable. Yeah.
And it coincides with which is part of the sort of emotional literacy sections of the book, your conviction that talking to friends and you mentioned that your dada, which is your mum's dad, right?
Yeah.
We had some great holidays, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right. He said that was one of the last things that I heard him say was he was 94, and he said, "At least we had some good holidays, mate." And I turned back and I said, "Yeah, we had some great holidays, but at least." I mean, I just think he felt that deficit, and I saw it 3 times over. I saw it with my dad and my stepdad, Derek, as well. That, they didn't end their lives saying, "I wish I'd seen less of my children. I wish I'd dominated more men. I wish I'd shrugged and walked away more often when I upset the woman who loves me." They all expressed this lurking regret that there hadn't been enough of the good stuff. Friendship and love and understanding and family. And I think there are boys, right now with stabilizers on their bicycles going around, and they're heading in exactly that direction, and I would save them the trouble, and because they're going to cause trouble to women as well.
And they're using the word gay as a pejorative to describe all the things that you've just described.
Nothing's changed in that respect. I mean, it's difficult to measure, but it really doesn't feel like that situation has improved. I remember, I was saying that I found the rules for being a boy a tight fit when I was, let's say, 7, but 2 of the things I did understand, and I called them in the book, the sovereign importance of early homophobia,
yes,
and the paramount objective of despising girls. Because if there's one thing worse than being a girl, it's being a gay, and only gays play with girls. And that much was clear. And I think it would be surprising, would it not, if all of that stuff that you're hearing when you're young, when your brain is still developing, if that doesn't leave a mark, if you're not left with some kind of lurking closet bigotry. In the book, I call it the Farage in the garage. And, I think, it's always worth keeping an eye on that. If you're serious about seeing women, if a man is serious about seeing women as fully human and fully equal, not human like some kind of charming and mysterious dolphin,
yes,
human like a human, put it this way, if I have to, human like a man, in order to get that idea through. And it's, sometimes we just don't see them the way that...
Even now?
Yeah. I think even, I speak for myself, we're a couple of disgusting libtard feminazi cucks, aren't we? So, but I think even liberals reckon they've got the job done because, I speak for myself.
No, sure.
There was a time when, I thought there's no way that I can be behaving like a sexist and complacent husband because I write anti-sexist comedy sketches, because I vote Labour, because I've read Man-Made Language by Dale Spender. So I've got this sorted. I am the leading anti-dad. I've got all the antibodies. It's going to be fine. And then, of course, it turns out I am just this bloke
who expects things to miraculously appear in drawers and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And, I say in the book, the Persil is the political. And, you can't put a wash on and then expect a medal. And, all that work, the unpaid, unthanked domestic work that has to get done in the house, somebody's got to do it. And it really does come as a surprise to some blokes that it doesn't happen by accident.
No, and it's a generational. I mean, it's going to take...
It is, and, because I saw my mum do everything,
same
and
here.
my dad do nothing.
Yes.
Inside the house.
Sure.
So it's but as I say in the book, it's the adoption of a new habit. It's not the evolution of gills. And anyone who's given up smoking can testify that a habit that felt like it was impossible to break, once you've done it for a couple of weeks, you look back and you go, why did I let that hold me back for so long? You form new habits. You overwrite new habits onto old ones.
Well, I still want a medal.
I still want
Every
a medal as
time.
well. I still want a medal, and I'm still very bad at putting things away in the right place. But I've been assured that getting it slightly wrong is better than refusing the job in the first place.
And not seeing stuff as well. I mean, literally walking past stuff and not noticing it, and then discovering later that was 6 feet high.
I would like to stress.
Screaming.
I'd like to stress that this is a work in progress. And,
it all is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It all is a work in progress. And maybe that's the big difference, and that people like Paul, your dad, never really dedicated any energy at all to trying to be different.
He just wasn't expected to. I mean, he went with the flow, and as far as he was concerned, it was a perfectly good. He hurt himself with how much he drank and he smoked, and he hurt himself by behaving in such a way that his wife left him. But at the time that he was doing it, it was just what he and his peers did, and that was, you work hard, you come home, you're a bit impatient with your wife and family, you go to the pub, and that was his life. And he, I'm not blaming him for not having the imagination to step outside of the box, because it looked like a perfectly normal box. It was what everyone did.
Very much a creature of his age, creature of his environment.
Absolutely.
You get caged by it almost in some senses.
Yeah.
Did you cry when he died?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Did you ever see him cry when he was alive?
Nearly.
When?
It's in the book. It's he.
I know it's in the book, but there's a lot of people listening.
Sorry.
Do not look at the old man behind the curtain.
It's in the book, James.
Yes.
Come on,
I told you at the beginning that
why don't we just read the book silently
Come full circle.
and let everyone try and guess what's in it? Yes. There's a very sad aspect to Mum and Dad's life, which was that my oldest brother, Martin, died of meningitis when he was 6, and I was born 10 months later. And it's always seemed very likely to me. In fact, I happen to know because my mum told me that I'm basically here because somebody else died. And so I've always had I always think I know a thing or two about luck.
Yes.
But yes, there was a moment where we were talking about his reputation sort of back in the day in the 70s.
This is after you met the bloke in the pub that
I
described him as a hero and a legend.
That's right, yeah. And the bloke had been going, Paul Webb, a legend for, shagging and drinking and fighting. And I reported this conversation to him after I'd had a few drinks myself, slightly tactlessly. But he was unfaithful to my mum, and I was angry with him about that. She just died. And he said, we had some good times. So he said we had some tough times, but we had some good times too, which I believe. But the tough times, that wasn't a euphemism. He was talking about a particular person, and I saw he nearly cried there, but he didn't.
And you nearly hit him just before that moment.
And just before that, I nearly hit him. Yeah, before I say it in the book. I'm telling the story slightly in a funny order, but I was so angry with him.
You're still angry with him?
I think I probably always will be a bit angry with him, yeah. When I think about... It's funny because the cliche is that when you become a parent yourself, you forgive your own parents for their flaws. But in some ways, it hasn't quite worked like that. Now that I have Esme and Dory, and I think about hitting them, or I think about ignoring them, or I think about discouraging them, or I think about, some of the stuff that happened and the way he didn't hit my mother to my knowledge, but the disrespectful way that they talked to each other and they yelled at each other, I just get angry all over again. And it's, I kind of balance it with the good things that I like about him, but I can't make that many excuses for him. I'm still angry with him. Yeah.
There's a line in Enemies of Promise by Cyril Connolly where he talks about people that went to public school being sort of almost held hostage by the intensity of the experiences that they had. And oddly, I thought of that while reading your book about growing up in the opposite end of the spectrum to Eton, which is where Cyril Connolly went. And as if you have in a way, your adolescence has extended because of your relationship with your dad, and that's why you've put so much effort into growing up, perhaps.
Yes, I think there's probably something in that, there was this huge act of rebellion, in that, what's the thing that would most irritate Dad. That was always the sort of, whatever's the opposite of him, that's what I'll do. And I mean, you can overstate that, but that was sort of always at the back of my mind, in that, he was delighted that I wanted to go to Cambridge University. Of course he was. But there again, but going into comedy, going into show business, I sort of say at the end of the book, families, village life is quite good for those accommodations we have to make with each other. You can't have these kind of blanket generalizations about whole groups of people when you notice that you live next door to one, and you have to rub up against them. And I sort of say that his view of lefty lovey champagne socialists, liberals with a slightly gay past, had to take a step back when he noticed that he had one for a son. And equally, my view of slightly racist, deeply sexist, white working class, non-college educated baby boomers, Tories, had to accommodate the fact that I had one for a dad, and we did sort of compromise there and sort of manage, but again, it's that's the thing about intolerance. It's always the exception that proves the rule. Dad. Well,
I don't mean you.
Yeah, exactly. Not you. I mean, family is family.
Yeah,
and
some of my best friends.
And Dad would talk about Phil and Malk, or whatever they were called, the gay couple that ran the chip shop down the road. Bloody good fish and chips. I mean, you've got to say it. That's the thing about you queers. They've always got something special. They've always got something extra, haven't they?
But he's saying more, isn't he, when he does that? He is saying a lot more. He is sort of saying, well, blow me down. It turns out that they're not that freakish and different. And odd.
Yes,
well.
No, it always comes as a surprise.
Your mum, losing her at such a young age, that'll be something most people reading the book can't relate to, because it is 17 is it's an almost it's impossible to contemplate.
Could have been worse. I mean,
How do you mean?
Well, I've got a friend who lost his dad when he was 8. Isn't it? Eight's worse than 17, isn't it? I mean, I don't know, but it's not a competition. But yes, what felt sort of particularly cruel about it was that we were just beginning to establish a sort of grown-up relationship.
Yes,
I was just beginning to talk to her as a semi-adult, so that was wicked, really. But what are you going to do? And I didn't.
Well, hang on. I mean, isn't that a little bit the opposite of the advice that I've taken away from your book? What are you going to do? I'm interested in what you did do. It's a.
Well, what I did do was not talk about it for 3 years.
Exactly.
When I was lucky that because I was at university at that point and Cambridge do a free, or certainly did a free counselling service. I mean, there's quite a long waiting list, but it's there, and. It wasn't that I suddenly noticed that I was in this terrible denial, terrible grief. It was this smaller, trivial thing that was this trigger. Frankly, to be honest, it was, I had this sort of casual sexual relationship going on with this girl, and I was colossally besotted and in love with, I thought, this boy, and then they went out with each other, and it's the perils of having a slightly fluid sexuality, which I did at the time, and I sort of couldn't eat for a fortnight, and I thought, hang on, it can't just be because of these guys. There must be something else going on. And eventually, I took myself along to the counselling service, and I describe in the book the sort of initial assessment where I'm talking about these two guys, and the chief of the counselling service looks frankly bored. I mean, these things I think are a lot more common than one would imagine. And then he said, "Thank you for that. Now, please tell me about your family." And so I told him about mum, and then living with dad, and then what it was like when mum and dad were married, and mum dying. And his pencil flew into action. And at the end of it, he said, I think there's been an unusual amount of separation in your life, and you use that as a model for current adversity, and it makes things feel worse than they really are. And I think you have a problem, and I think we can help. And to hear a proper professional grown-up say that just made all the difference. And all it is you go along for an hour a week, and you talk and you're under no pressure to start crying about everything. There again, you don't have to be cheerful either. Your counsellor, you know, you can like him, but he's not your friend and he's not your granny and he's not your, you know, you're not wasting his time. He has literally nothing better to do. This is his job. And so you can do that without feeling guilty, and you can go through the week thinking this is a particularly unpleasant experience in my head, but at least I can tell Michael about it on Thursday, and it makes all the difference. I mean, I was having suicidal thoughts. You know, it got fairly bad. So it was a good thing that I went there, and I would recommend it to anyone. I mean, it's not easy to get hold of in Britain.
It's getting harder.
Free counselling. It is. But if it's possible, then grab it with both hands, because it made a big difference to me. I remember my counsellor saying, you know, because I did feel guilty, and I did feel that, you know, that I felt self-indulgent for talking about my, you know, difficult feelings. And, you know, it's one of the worst accusations a man can make against himself. Or, you know, you should shrug this off. You know, you're being self-indulgent.
Pull your socks up.
Pull your socks up, exactly. Worst things happen to people, other people all the time. And I mentioned this. Michael said, look, it's like you're in a doctor's surgery and you've got a broken arm, and the person next to you has got 2 broken arms, and the person next to them has got 2 broken arms and a broken leg. And yes, they are worse off than you, but the point is, you've got a broken arm and it hurts, and you're here and they're not here. So let's hear about your broken arm. And that, I think, was a useful thing to hear. Of course, there's always someone worse off, but if you're literally thinking about killing yourself, and hopefully before it gets anywhere near that, then you should talk to someone.
Do you still have therapy?
I did for a while to help me stop smoking, because it was getting. I tried everything else, and eventually I thought there must be just something else going on here. And also there was, you know, my marriage with Abby is good and it's solid, but we were going through a tricky patch. And I wanted to talk to someone, and you know, I'm in a very fortunate position now that I can afford to see someone privately, so I'm not taking up other people's counsellors. But that was only for a few weeks.
Of course, almost done, because you mentioned your wife at the end.
Yes.
If I had one criticism of the book, because in the interview here you haven't done this, but you don't put much responsibility at the foot of women when things go wrong. You don't idolise them or mythologise them, but I mean, sometimes in a relationship, it could be their fault things have gone bad. There's a slight sense it's always the bloke's fault. Maybe I'm being unfair.
I think that's probably fair enough. I think that could well be just straightforward cowardice on my part and wanting an easy life. How am I going to criticise Abby in a book that may sell?
No, well, you can't do that. No.
That may sell thousands.
No, you put a poem at the end of it as well.
She does. Yeah, she does get a lovely poem. One of her poems. Yes, of course, she can be a real pain in the arse. And you know, I didn't mean her specifically. I just meant the idea. I do. Yeah. No, of course, you know, women are as flawed as blokes, but I'm there are particular things that are, I think, exclusive to men that we tend to struggle with, that, you know, because I'm talking from my own experience about my own life and what I've been up to, that of course that's where the focus is. But no, it would be, as you say, I don't put women on a pedestal, because that's quite often a neat way to, you know, say this woman is excellent and therefore, you know, you can write off all the others as shit.
Yes.
So I try to avoid that, and I certainly don't think that women are nicer than men, because again, that's a convenient way of making them look after men, saying, you know, nurture. But you're so nurturing and caring and marvelous, and we're desperately trying to find scientific studies that prove that female brains are nicer than male brains, and that's why you should
never have to wash socks again.
And that's why you should change this nappy.
Finally, what's next? I mean, because we talked about the postcard, but it wasn't a postcard. Hollywood.
Yeah.
You're going to modestly shrug, but one never knows. Do you have any ambitions left professionally?
Can't be bothered to get my hair and teeth fixed.
Would you have to? I suppose you would.
I think Hollywood these days, don't you?
Yeah.
Anyway, no. Well, the next thing is, it was a 2-book deal, and there's an idea for a novel. Which scares the hell out of me, because this time I've got to make up a whole story.
Have you started?
I've made a very good first 93 words start.
That's it. You're over the worst.
I've got a great idea for a start. It's just the middle and the end I need to think about now.
And that, I mean, was that an ambition?
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
When you started reading voraciously, I hesitate to use a cliche, but we're halfway in.
Yeah.
So it set you free. It made you who you are. It opened windows you didn't know existed.
Oh, yeah.
And you want to do that for other people.
No, reading was a big deal, and now I've always wanted to write novels. But there again, my ambition as an actor, I'll never retire from acting because I love it. But I found writing the book, my word, I like the hours, and I like working at home, and I like not having to leave London, which I went to enormous trouble to move to.
And now you have to go up and down the country trying to sell go to Cardiff, and I mean, it's brilliant when you're in it, when it's flying and it's singing. But it's horrible getting to that point, isn't it? Or are you one of the people that's blessed with the
writing?
Yes.
Yes. No, it is horrible. No, a lot of it. Well, I mean, it sort of depends. A lot of the time, it's an enjoyable kind of difficult.
Yes.
I mean, when you're in a section and you sort of have an idea where this chapter's going and where you want to get to, then every sentence is this enjoyable challenge. And all the skills, to the extent that I have them, that I learned as a sketch writer with David, are quite surprisingly transferable, because you learn something about economy, you learn something about setting things up quickly with a couple of strokes of the brush, if you like, and of course dialogue is my comfort zone. I'm never happier than when I can get characters talking,
which other writers find almost impossible to do. So
it's good fun, and I've enjoyed giving everyone different voices. There's nothing I hate more than novels where
started with the Guy Guys, didn't it?
It started with
all 15 of them
the
have
Guy
their own
Guys,
little
12 like the apostles.
Guy Guys,
the Guy Guys, my imaginary friends.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
That was lovely.
Hooray! Thanks. Cheers.